A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. For as long as I can remember, my parents have always been strict when it comes to what I read. They believe in shielding me from the dark side of literature, books they deemed inappropriate or dangerous, which often encompassed anything that challenged the status quo or stirred my imagination too vividly. This led to an interesting internal conflict for me. While I was desperate to escape into worlds full of adventure, mystery, and, yes, even the darkness they so feared, I felt trapped under their watchful eyes. It all began one chilly autumn afternoon when I stumbled upon an old box in the attic while searching for my winter clothes. Inside were worn-out paperbacks, the covers faded and spines cracked, titles that made my heart race with excitement just reading them. 1984. Fahrenheit 451, and even the perks of being a wallflower. I couldn't believe my luck. I rifled through the pages, inhaling the musty scent of forgotten stories, my mind racing with ideas of how I could read them undetected. So I devised a plan. I would lie about volunteering times at the local community center, creating a facade of altruism while I secretly lost myself in the pages of these banned books, snatching moments at home whenever I could, hidden in the dim light of my room, thoroughly engrossed in worlds that dared to challenge the ordinary. The thrill of reading each book was amplified by the tension of nearly being discovered. I can still feel the anxiety my heart would drum up as I heard my parents' footsteps approaching my room, the panic of tossing the book beneath my bed or pretending to be occupied with homework. Every day brought a renewed sense of rebellion, and though I felt guilty for lying, the joys of reading and the new perspectives I gained were intoxicating, filling parts of my soul that had felt stifled under my parents' protective grip. However, as the months went on, my deception began to weigh heavily on me, gnawing at my conscience like an unwelcome stranger. The guilt was persistent, a dark shadow that stretched longer with each borrowed moment spent in those fictional realms while my reality lay neglected. It felt like I was double living, one life as the dutiful daughter and another as a voracious reader devouring forbidden fruit. I found myself drawn into the narratives to escape the guilt, grappling with complex characters and moral dilemmas that had me questioning the very lines between right and wrong. The stories opened my eyes wider, forcing me to confront my own beliefs, and with each page turned, I realized more about myself than I had ever anticipated. Finally, the inevitable day came. I returned home earlier than usual from my volunteering, boisterous laughter echoing in the hallway as I overheard my parents discussing a recent scandal involving a local family, something that triggered my instinct to flee, the kind of wild and uncontrollable urge to hide, to keep my secrets tucked away from prying eyes. As I entered my room, barely able to breathe, I found myself staring at the open books piled on my desk, the pages fluttering in the gentle breeze from the cracked window. In that moment of reckoning, I found clarity. It wasn't just the thrill of the stories but what they taught me about facing truths. I had built this elaborate tapestry of lies, and it felt utterly exhausting. That night, after tossing and turning, I gathered the courage to write my parents a letter, something raw and heartfelt, confessing everything, the lies, the books, my need for understanding, and my thirst for knowledge. I left the letter on the kitchen table and went to bed, feeling strangely light, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. When I woke up the next morning, my parents were waiting, and my heart raced, not with fear but hope. What followed was a lengthy conversation filled with unexpected discoveries. My parents shared their own fears about the world, how they wanted to protect me from the confusion and chaos that could come from confronting uncomfortable truths too soon. In the end, I found out that they were more open than I had ever imagined, their love for me woven tightly with their fears, and together, we discussed what I had read. I had anticipated rejection, but instead, I found a middle ground, a new agreement where we could explore literature together, perhaps even tackling some of those challenging books as a family. Looking back, it wasn't only about the thrill of defiance, it was about forging deeper connections through honesty. Now, about 6 months later, the shadows of guilt have dimmed, replaced by a deeper understanding between my parents and me, an understanding that has allowed me to step into the world of literature freely, knowing that while the stories may challenge us, they also connect us in the most profound ways. My mom even recommended a few books of her own, and I often find us discussing the very themes that used to frighten me. Sometimes I wonder, if I had never lied, would we have ever reached this point of openness? The irony of my confession becoming a bridge instead of a chasm still lingers, a perfect reminder that sometimes honesty is the doorway to liberation. And as the weeks rolled on, I found myself embracing not just the books I had once furtively devoured, but also a genuine relationship with my parents that had blossomed from my initial deception. The irony persisted like a quiet echo in my mind, What had begun as a mere act of rebellion had paved the way for understanding, empathy, and connection. Our late-night discussions started to feel more like exchanges between equals instead of the monologues I once dreaded. For the first time, I could speak freely, my tentative words met with thoughtful consideration rather than dismissiveness. My mom, whose narrow view of the world had previously felt like a cage, revealed layers I had never seen. She spoke of her own teenage years of confusion and rebellion, of the tightly bound expectations surrounding her, of books she had longed to read but felt were never provided for her. It was a two-way street, paved with vulnerability and mutual respect, and I often imagine that many parents in the world might also find themselves carrying unexamined fears and baggage that color their judgments. My father surprised me when, during one of those evenings, he pulled out a well-worn copy of 1984 from a shelf, a silent testament to his own teenage curiosity. He read passages aloud, his voice rising and falling like a gentle wave, and I sat transfixed, watching as he began to articulate thoughts he had held back for years. The stories we shared soon morphed into discussions about freedom, censorship, and the ways in which the world often seeks to bind us with invisible chains. They were discussions that blurred the lines between parent and child, inviting me to express my own thoughts about why the narratives of the past were as relevant today as they had ever been. As these conversations expanded our world, I noticed subtle shifts in my parents' demeanor. The tension that often filled the air, the silent judgments exchanged during dinner, began to dissipate, replaced by questions that probed deeper than just homework or weekend plans. I revealed, in time, my hidden treasure trove of other books, banned or otherwise, in a hesitant effort, expecting disbelief or reprimand, yet their only response was curiosity, a desire to understand why I was drawn to those particular narratives. My parents eventually suggested we read one of my secret titles together, creating a new family tradition around literature. I chose The Catcher in the Rye, a coming-of-age saga that had once tempted me to stretch my own boundaries. The first time we sat down to read it together, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement, fully aware that we were traversing territory once deemed taboo, and I held my breath, anticipating any possible ripples of discomfort. Oddly enough, all those frayed edges yielded softness. My father's laughter during Holden's quirks and my mother sitting quietly through the emotional turmoil was strangely comforting. With every shared passage, every discerning glance or nod in agreement, I sensed the walls between us continuing to dissolve further, brick by brick. It became clear that for all the hidden chapters of our lives, honesty had acted as the ink that penned a renewed narrative for our family. Relaying my experiences became a healing process, not just for me, but for them, too. It was as if we had embarked on a literary quest together, confronting harsh truths, handling abrasive characters, and making sense of complex emotions that each book evoked. The old fears I had felt about them severing ties, if I confess, turned into rays of understanding, defying any expectation. It was hard to believe I once feared their judgment. These moments of connection had become both a refuge and a revelation. We initiated a new phase in our family life centered on exploration and acceptance, each book we read together leading us to deeper conversations that demanded both vulnerability and courage. Through our shared experiences, we began to explore the world outside our home, conversing about its many wonders long after the books were closed. Months later, during a warm autumn evening, as we wrapped ourselves in cozy blankets on the porch, my heart swelled with gratitude. We shared our latest reads, each story a testament to the struggles and strengths of human experience, and the laughter that enveloped us felt as natural as the rustling leaves around us. When the conversation culminated in my unique tale of deception, I chuckled, recalling how artfully I had woven my narrative of lies. I remarked, only half jokingly, how ironic it was that this all turned out for the best. My mom chuckled softly, a knowing smile dancing on her lips. "Isn't it funny," she mused, "how a little lie can lead to something so honest?" In that moment, as we exchanged gentle glances full of unspoken understandings, I fully grasped the power of stories, not merely as vessels of adventure or lessons learned, but as bridges built, connecting us in our humanity. For now, honesty had become our family's new currency, one that brought us closer than I ever could have imagined, and I fell asleep that night with the warmth of 1,000 shared tales cradling me, a soothing reminder of how beautifully complex and connected our lives had become. For a while, everything felt perfect, a harmonious balance in our family life nurtured through dialogue and literature. But then a curious thing happened that unfurled the next chapter of this journey. One late evening, rummaging through the attic for forgotten treasures, I unearthed an old box of my childhood belongings. Inside, I found remnants of an earlier life, old drawings, fading notes from friends, and buried amidst them, a diary I had kept for a year during my most rebellious phase. The pages brimmed with unfiltered thoughts, confessions of secret readings and deep fears about my parents' approval. Feeling a blend of nostalgia and unease, I realized that the words captured the essence of my past dilemma. They chronicled the very thoughts that had driven me to the lies. I considered sharing it with my parents. After all, the thoughts had initially shaped my deceit. But fear momentarily gripped me, a faint shadow of my earlier self-research. Would dragging those old fears back into the light disrupt the harmony we had built? After days of contemplation, I summoned the courage to share the diary with my parents. Sitting down at the dinner table, I felt the weight of history in the room, a convergence of past and present that felt very much alive. I passed the diary to my mom, my fingers trembling slightly at the thought of her reading the truths I'd buried. As she opened the first page, memories flooded back. She read quietly, her brow furrowed in both understanding and concern. I watched as she turned each page, witnessing how a simple diary could weave together those early insecurities and another layer of connection. She finally closed it with a gentle sigh, glancing at my father, who appeared equally reflective. "You know," my father spoke, breaking the silence, "this was a part of you we never got to see. I can't say I understand all of it, but I do now see how much you struggled. Thank you for sharing it with us." And in that moment of quiet acceptance, I understood that honesty, in all its forms, whether born from rebellion or vulnerability, took courage, but it also laid the foundation for deeper understanding. The past need not lie dormant in dusty boxes, but rather could be embraced as a means of connection and growth. Despite the initial uncertainty of sharing my old fears, I left the table feeling lighter, our family bond stronger than ever before. We had created a new chapter, built not solely on the foundation of literature, but also crafted from our shared experiences and vulnerabilities. Each story, whether fictional or a fragment of my truth, became a testament to our journey, endless, evolving, filled with laughter, love, and the deeper insights that accompany growing together. As I settled into bed that night, cradling the precious diary close, I drifted off to sleep with a serene heart, attuned to the quiet yet powerful echoes of connection that continued to resonate through our lives. The next morning brought with it the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls like a whispered promise of new beginnings. I awoke with a sense of peace that felt almost surreal. The weight of my secret had been lifted, replaced by an openness I had never before believed could exist in my family. As I padded down the hallway, thoughts fluttered like the pages of my books, bubbling with excitement about the conversations that awaited me. The kitchen was alive with the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of my dad's humming, a melody that had always signified comfort. My mom, noticing my entrance, looked up from her morning ritual of arranging a bright bouquet of wildflowers on the table and greeted me with a smile that seemed to radiate warmth. We sat together over breakfast, and with each bite, I could sense a new current flowing through our dialogue. My parents were no longer just the guardians of my childhood, they were becoming partners in discovery, sharing their own experiences with books and stories that shaped their understanding of the world. It felt refreshing to dive into discussions about themes of humanity, society, and the myriad emotions that literature can evoke. My mom spoke passionately about a book she had recently read, one that dealt with the struggles of inner identity, while my dad recounted his youth, the challenges he faced, and how a simple novel had provided him solace during difficult times. Their stories alternated like a harmonious dance, weaving together our past and present in a new narrative tapestry infused with honesty and vulnerability. I couldn't help but marvel at how my once solitary escape into these worlds now had the potential to deepen my relationships. As the days turned into weeks, our family dinners evolved into literary discussions, each session igniting laughter and thoughtful exchanges, where we dissected characters and plots as if they were family members we were getting to know. My parents often encouraged me to share insights from the books I was reading on my own, and I accepted this challenge with relish. The more I expressed myself, the more the barriers I had felt began to dissolve, replaced by a buoyancy of mutual respect that transformed our dynamics. I discovered a deep, collective joy in these moments, the kind that fosters a profound sense of belonging. One evening, after discussing the fine line between courage and foolishness found within a particular story, my mom turned to me, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you for trusting us," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Your honesty opened doors we didn't even know were closed." Her words struck me with such weight, I measured their impact against my fears, realizing how misguided I had been to think that my concerns would render our family fragile. As I began to pen down my musings one quiet night, the diary now filled with memories and reflections. I relished the way words served as both a mirror and a window into my evolving self. I was growing, learning how to embrace the power of truth not just for my sake but for the sake of the love that already enveloped us. And while the act of deception had initially felt like a choice born of fear, the reckoning brought clarity, revealing pathways I could never have envisioned before. Just last week, we gathered in the living room to host a movie night inspired by a classic we had all read together. As the opening credits rolled, I caught my dad grinning as he nudged my mom, whispering a particularly funny line to her that had caught his fancy from the book. That shared chuckle was electrifying, a poignant moment that affirmed what we had built, a space where laughter and the wisdom of stories intermingled freely, a sanctuary for our expressions. As we settled in to watch, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, realizing that within those walls, we had created a fortress of understanding forged through the power of narrative. As my eyelids grew heavy against the backdrop of flickering images and communal laughter, I felt comforted by the thought that my journey had only just begun, that there were more chapters yet to unfold, rich with the echoes of voices we love and lessons that continue to challenge and inspire us. And in that tranquil embrace of twilight, I drifted into sleep, dreaming of adventures yet to be written together, knowing that the words would flow between us and carry us forward in the intricate tapestry of our lives. When I first slid into the driver's seat of my Tesla, it felt like the dawn of a new era, not just for me but for how I viewed modern life and technology. I remember the tingling thrill of excitement, the way the soft hum of the electric engine promised a future unshackled from the noise and pollution of the past. My friends ridiculed me then, calling me a tech nerd and mocking my decision to invest in a glorified computer on wheels, but I brushed it off, intoxicated by the sleek design and the allure of sustainability. Over the months, my affinity for the car deepened. I loved the dopamine rush of the instant torque when I pressed the accelerator, the way I could summon my voice assistant to conjure up music, directions, or even a bit of levity from the mundane daily commute. However, everything changed one autumn afternoon when my routine drive home was suddenly interrupted by an unsettling event. Just as I was merging onto the highway, another driver flashed their headlights, gesturing frantically as they maneuvered around me. Confused, I peered into my rearview mirror and saw a family in an old minivan, clearly in distress. My therapy dog, Barkley, who sat beside me with his head resting lazily on my arm, seemed to sense the tension. I slowed down, pulling to the shoulder of the road, my heart racing with a combination of anxiety and curiosity. As I stepped out, the chill of the evening air hit me and I felt the weight of judgment from passing cars, all of them seemingly aware of this strange, spontaneous moment unfolding. The family rushed out of their minivan, a woman in a white blouse and a man with an ashen face, clutching a small child who appeared to be choking. In an instant, every part of me screamed to help. My heart raced as I recalled my first aid training from years ago. With an urgency that drowned my fear, I rushed toward them, my Tesla's sleek lines glimmering in the afternoon sun, a beacon of both technology and newfound responsibility. After a chaotic few minutes, punctuated by the sounds of desperation and gasps for breath, I managed to assist the child, urging them to cough and finally releasing a small object that had lodged in their throat. Relief washed over the family, whose tears now reflected gratitude rather than panic. I could feel their weight lift just as I felt my own pulse calming in the aftershocks of that dangerous moment. But as I turned to return to my car, a thought crept into my mind, knitting itself with fear. Would they see me as just some tech-savvy guy with a fancy car, not a hero, but merely a pawn of materialism? The fear lingered, reminding me of the conversations about the elitism often associated with electric vehicles. I climbed back into my Tesla, feeling not just drained but a little ashamed, questioning the world I inhabited and whether I'd ever truly been one of them, the nice people who drove simple cars, lived simple lives, and were genuinely a part of the community. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection as I pulled up online to a popular subreddit, r/askreddit. I composed a post that translated my turmoil into words, articulating both my pride in my car and my concerns about how it could segregate me from others. After hitting post, I let the debate swirl in my mind while I lay in bed, the glow of my screen illuminating the somber shadows of my room. The responses came flooding in, many sympathized with my plight while others dismissed my feelings as trivial, mere echoes of guilt for disdainful wealth. The engagement tugged on my emotions. Some commenters shared similar experiences, while others recounted how their Teslas had become a symbol of status, painting a picture that was both vibrant and troubling. For the next few weeks, I grappled with the dichotomy between my love for the car and the vision of an isolated future it might represent. It wasn't until an opportunity arose, a local charity organizing an event for underprivileged youth where the community could discuss electric vehicles and how they could benefit everyone, that the fog of confusion began to dissipate. I offered to bring my Tesla, eager to share what drew me to it while also encouraging accessibility and understanding, hoping to bridge that gap I felt separating me from others. And there it was, as kids climbed in and excitedly pushed buttons, their faces lighting up with joy, I witnessed something revealing and profound. It wasn't about the material, it was about sharing experiences, laughter, and connection. As I left the event that evening, the smile on my face mirrored the sunset, a mix of relief and budding hope. I understood then that it wasn't the car that defined me, but the choices I made with it that could reshape my relationship with my community. As for my post on Reddit, I returned to it to share my experience and reflect on how I transformed my initial feelings of isolation into connection. The thread had blossomed with a variety of stories, some filled with heartwarming outcomes, others serving as a reminder that within the vastly sprawling universe of technology, it's our shared humanity that ultimately matters. I realized that despite my car's sleekness and the status it might convey, it was just a vehicle, both literally and metaphorically, for deeper connections, and as the day faded into night, the hum of the electric engine became a melody of promise, one that I eagerly continued to explore with an open heart and mind. As I drove home under the blanket of twilight, the blue glow of the dashboard illuminated my face, casting soft shadows that danced to the hum of the electric motor. I couldn't help but think of all the interactions I had that day, the threads weaving together a tapestry of shared experiences. The stories I had read and those I had bravely shared of my own made me realize that there was more to owning a Tesla than the sleek, cutting-edge technology or the environmental consciousness it represented. It was about the connections I was forging, each encounter igniting a spark of camaraderie that I had previously thought impossible within the isolating confines of technology. I had initially approached the announcement of the salute with a twinge of apprehension. The idea of gathering with hundreds of fellow owners and waving at strangers felt oddly intimidating. Yet, as I parked my car alongside a sea of gleaming Teslas, I felt an unexpected thrill of belonging. Strangers exchanged knowing smiles and nods, acknowledgement of a shared choice that seemed almost sacred. When we all raised our arms in a salute, I felt a swell of joy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was as if, for just a moment, we transcended the labels we often wore in the wider world, parent, worker, neighbor, and became simply Tesla owners, a tribe bound by our decision to embrace a different future. As I navigated the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that last evening's gathering had awakened something profound within me. An urge to connect further, to not just speak about my car but to dip my toes into interpersonal relationships, the kind that thrive outside of a screen. I might have started as a lonely owner with ethereal goals of sustainability, but now I felt equipped to invite others into my life, if only for a brief coffee or a chat about shared journeys. I parked my Tesla in the garage, still reverberating with the energy of the day, and could almost hear the echoes of laughter and stories traded among friends. I picked up my phone, and for the first time, I didn't see it as an intrusive device but rather as a window to my next potential connection. Scrolling through the recent threads, I stumbled upon a post asking for recommendations for local meetups for Tesla owners. A small grin tugged at my lips, and within moments I had commented with my interest and an invitation for a casual coffee outing at a nearby cafe. My heart raced at the thought of opening my life a little wider, allowing new friendships to blossom, just like the evening's salutes had ignited camaraderie among us stranger drivers. That night, the potential of connection sparked hope within me, a realization that, perhaps, the salute was not merely a gesture but a beacon guiding me toward a community I hadn't known I craved. I happily fell asleep, dreaming not of electric highways or future innovations, but of the laughter I might soon share with newfound companions, each one fueling the promise of tomorrow's conversations. Update: a week later, I found myself sitting in that very cafe, surrounded by the soft murmur of laughter and conversations just like the ones I'd read about. Each person brought their own story. One had converted their garage into a workshop for DIY electric projects, another was an artist who used solar panels for her studio. As I laughed and shared my own experiences, I realized that each individual's narrative intertwined with mine, forming an unbreakable bond. My Tesla, it turned out, had become more than just a mode of transport. It had become the vessel that carried me toward genuine human connection. I understood now that it wasn't just about the type of car I owned, it was about the paths that unfolded from that ownership, paths leading to friendship, laughter, and the kind of warmth that can only come from moments spent in shared company. The threads we create around us, stitched together by our hopes and shared experiences, are what truly drive us forward, electric or not. And in that bubbling cafe, amid conversations that sparked and flew through the air, I felt anchored and finally at home. As I sat there, nursing my lukewarm coffee and watching the world outside the large windows of the cafe, I couldn't help but be captivated by the sight of families and friends drifting in and out, their laughter mingling with the notes of a gentle piano that seemed to fill the air with warmth. Each car that passed, along with their unique stories and journeys, reminded me of the conversations I had shared online, the kind that made me realize being a Tesla owner was less about the car itself and more about the community it unwittingly introduced me to. Turning my gaze back to the table, I noticed my phone buzz softly, drawing me back into the digital space that had sparked all this. It was a response to my thread. A fellow Tesla owner, Sarah, had shared a particularly poignant story about the emotional journey she underwent after she lost her job. She had taken solace in her daily drives, using her vehicle as a place to contemplate and process her feelings. Inspired by her bravery, I typed back, sharing my own transition from feeling isolated to finding solace in shared experiences, and how the little gatherings had transformed me from a passive commuter to an active participant in my own life. With every keystroke, I could feel the connection strengthening. It was almost palpable, like an electric charge bridging the distance between us. As the cafe lights dimmed, an inviting glow filled the room, and the conversations faded into a soft murmur around me, I suddenly thought of hosting a small gathering of my own. With a tentative excitement swelling within, I imagined a place where the stories of Tesla owners could come together, in the backyard of my own home, perhaps, surrounded by flickering fairy lights and warm fires where we could share not just our car anecdotes but also our lives. I pictured each person arriving, laughter spilling into the night, each tale weaving into a rich tapestry of our collective experiences, the feeling of community blossoming into something beautifully tangible. That evening, I left the cafe with a spark ignited in my heart, an urge to connect, communicate, and transform my newfound realizations into tangible experiences. At home, I jotted down a list of ideas, snacks, drinks, even a few fun games, or perhaps a shared playlist that could have our glowing electric engines humming along in harmony. And as the night carried on, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The fear of vulnerability I once harbored began to dissolve, leaving behind only the thrilling possibility of what was to come. Fast forward a few weeks, as I prepared my backyard for the first gathering, I marveled at how a simple thread on Reddit had woven this entire experience together. Friends and acquaintances filled my yard, each with stories to share, shedding light on their journeys, from professional triumphs to personal challenges, all the while embracing the very same car that had once made me feel so isolated. Sitting there with a drink in hand, I looked around at familiar faces and new friends, the barriers that once made me hesitant now replaced with an understanding born from the shared experience of our rides. I recognized then that my own initial visions of yearning for admiration or status had faded into deeper connections that fed my soul, friendships that pulsated with the heartbeats of authenticity and trust. As the evening air wrapped around us, filled with the warmth of conversation, laughter, and the scent of grilled food wafting into the night, the realization struck me again. It wasn't just a sleek, silent car in the driveway but a vessel guiding me towards an incredible community of souls. In the laughter shared and stories exchanged, I learned that perhaps the journey we embark on isn't solely about the destination or the vehicle we drive, it's about where we choose to steer our lives, recognizing that the true power lies not in the electric hum of technology, but in the profound connections we cultivate with one another as we traverse this beautiful, chaotic road together. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I found a serenity in that moment, a newfound understanding of my place in the world, and I smiled softly, eager for the adventures, both on the road and within this remarkable community, that lay ahead. When I received the news that my older sister, Claire, had to move back in with our parents, something deep inside me told me that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't fathom at the moment. I'm Emma, the youngest of three, and my relationship with Claire has always been a rocky one. Sure, we had shared laughter and tears growing up, but there was something about her larger-than-life persona that often overshadowed my quieter, more reserved disposition. I had built a life for myself, a snug little apartment in the heart of the city with a decent job that allowed me to pay my bills while still enjoying a few luxuries here and there. So when my parents called with concern edging their voices, explaining that Claire had been laid off and needed a place to stay temporarily, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. They explained how Claire would contribute financially to the household, which seemed reasonable on the surface, but as the weeks passed, it became disappointingly clear that this was not going to be a temporary arrangement. The first indication of the shift came one afternoon when I casually visited my parents. Walking through the familiar doorway, I was immediately engulfed in a whirl of mismatched furniture and the uniquely cluttered chaos of their living room. It felt different now. Claire had rearranged the space, filling it with scattered boxes, remnants of her previous life. She greeted me with the same beaming smile, but I could sense an underlying tension, a whisper of irritation hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. We exchanged pleasantries that felt stilted and awkward, and it quickly became apparent that her presence was overshadowing mine. It didn't take long for her to bring up the topic of finances, how my parents were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments while trying to help her get back on her feet. It was a tough conversation that had me feeling cornered, like they expected me to take action. I found myself drowning in guilt, torn between helping my family and maintaining my own sense of independence. They mentioned how my contribution to the mortgage would ease their burdens and allow Claire more time to get a new job, framing it as a family obligation that I simply couldn't escape. After all, right? Family sticks together. The idea of throwing money their way felt like a no-brainer, but I couldn't help but wonder if Claire would truly be grateful or if she would instead see it as another opportunity to lean on me while I struggled to maintain my budding career. I mulled over it for days, and with each passing moment, the thought of participating in this financial strain more than I had anticipated grew heavier. It wasn't just my money at stake, it was my mental space, my comfort, and my sense of security that was being tested. As the weeks turned to months, the stress festered. A particularly low evening found me swirling through the darkness of my mind, battling with the anxiety of homeownership versus my sense of familial duty. Claire continued to thrive in the chaotic comfort of our parents' home, her laughter echoing through the walls while I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, feeling the distance grow. I pondered my worth in our family dynamic and felt torn between my urge to support them and my instinct to protect my own growing future. When confrontation finally loomed, it exploded into one dramatic night over a family dinner where we sat across the table, Claire alight with engaging stories from her day while I quietly picked at the cold pasta on my plate. In a moment of frustration, I voiced my feelings about not wanting to pay the mortgage. The air turned electric, and for the first time, Claire's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of genuine indignation. "It's not just my responsibility," I asserted, a shaky confidence underlined by the crack in my voice. She was taken aback, and for a moment, I wondered if I had finally clarified my stance, but instead, all hell broke loose. I witnessed an explosion of accusations hurled between Claire and me, sharp words clattering like glass breaking. My parents, caught in the crossfire, tried to mediate, but I felt less like a daughter and more like a burden. Heat rose in my chest as Claire accused me of selfishness, while I voiced my feelings of unappreciation and betrayal. It was a raw, painful argument, and when it finally fizzled out, I couldn't shake off the suffocating realization that I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the way things were, or if I wanted to. I excused myself that night, feeling more isolated than ever, and upon returning to my apartment, I fell into a deep, restless sleep, punctuated with dreams of family betrayals and financial obligations that loomed over me like dark clouds. Days blended into weeks until I finally decided to distance myself from the toxic cycle of guilt and anger. I started to think critically about my own wants and needs. I drafted a letter to my parents, outlining my decision not to contribute to the mortgage, hoping it would provide clarity for all of us. It was written with a tense love, filled with the emotional depth of someone who desperately wanted to reconnect but felt trapped by the dynamic set years ago. I explained that I loved them all dearly, but I could no longer sacrifice my own stability for their peace. The letters found their way to my parents, and although the response wasn't immediately warm, my parents at least acknowledged my courage to stand my ground. Claire, however, took it harder than I expected. Her phone call that followed was rife with anger and misunderstanding, yet I felt something shift. Instead of clashing, I allowed her to express herself while I calmly responded, and to my surprise, her tone softened. Weeks turned to months. Though our relationship didn't magically mend, it did begin to evolve towards something more honest. Claire ultimately found a new job that stabilized her income, and while it took time, we began to rebuild the bridge our family needed. I learned that sometimes, a stand for myself did not stem from selfishness but from a place of deep self-respect. That unanticipated reflection taught me the art of balance, how love can coexist with boundaries. And while the discussion of finances still hung in the air like a specter, our family unit began to resonate with a different tone, a more supportive, understanding one. I shared this story with a friend as we laughed about the ridiculousness of our familial dynamics. And the strangest thing happened. Claire popped into my thoughts, reminding me that, sometimes, the way you navigate conflict can redefine relationships, even if it feels contentious at first. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows of previous conflicts melted into the hush of my room, and I reveled in the soft glow of acceptance I felt. Maybe, in facing the storm together, we had each become stronger, more resilient. I would continue to carve my own path and embrace the complexity of love with boundaries, wrapped in the possibility of new beginnings and stronger ties. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, for a moment, but that moment helped safeguard my heart and nurture a family connection that was worth every ounce of struggle. As days turned into weeks, the dynamics at home shifted like the ebb and flow of the ocean tides, and I could feel the undertow of change swirling around me. My sister's presence had transformed the atmosphere. The house was no longer just a shell echoing with silent resentments and unspoken words, but was now filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to take out the trash. I caught myself glancing at her when I thought she wasn't watching, noticing the way she'd laugh at her own silly jokes or how her eyes would shimmer when she spoke about her work. I felt a flicker of warmth, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to embrace in years. I wondered if this was the unfamiliar sound of healing, an orchestra assembling after decades of discordant notes, each of us tentatively racing our instruments to join the symphony. Yet, beneath this newly woven tapestry lay a knot of tension that refused to loosen. The impending reality of our parents' financial situation loomed over us like dark clouds on the horizon. They had worked tirelessly to keep a roof over our heads, sacrificing much for a sense of security that now seemed delicate. I couldn't shake off the guilt swirling in my gut, an insistent reminder that my own independence had inadvertently contributed to the distance growing between my family and our responsibilities. We were all learning to navigate these choppy waters together, bound by a shared sense of duty, but the question echoed in my mind, was I responsible for saving us from drowning? One crisp autumn evening, as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in rich oranges and purples, I took a walk to gather my thoughts. I needed clarity. I found myself wandering to the coffee shop down the street, a cozy little place filled with the aroma of freshly brewed beans and the soft hum of conversations that somehow made my worries feel lighter. As I sipped my cappuccino, I overheard a couple discussing their struggles with family dynamics, and it struck me how universal our experiences were. That was when I realized I wasn't alone, that this shared pain, this negotiation of love and obligation, resonated beyond the walls of our family. When I returned home, a darkness was hanging in the air. My parents had decided to have the talk about their mortgage again. As they gathered us around the dining room table, I could see the worry etched into their faces, lines deepening like cracks in a porcelain vase, beautiful but fragile. They explained how the financial burden had grown heavier since my sister had moved in, how they had hoped the extra help would ease their situation, but instead it felt like an anchor dragging us all down. I could feel my heart racing, the old defenses rising up like walls starting to thicken around me again. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to connect, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. Finally, I spoke up, my voice steady but soft. What if we came together to plan this out? I want to help. The room fell silent, each of us in our thoughts, the tension a thick, almost tangible fog. My sister's eyes lit up, and for a moment, the lightness from the coffee shop danced back into the room. We frantically brainstormed ideas, pooling resources like a patchwork quilt, slowly stitching together something new. It was in that moment that I felt a compelling shift, a sturdy thread, woven through the fabric of our relationships, an undeniable connection that reminded us we were all part of the same tapestry. As the weeks passed, we fine-tuned our household budget, and while some days were harder than others, we managed to claw back the control that had slipped from our fingers. The burden didn't evaporate, but sharing it made it bearable. The night before my parents were set to meet with their mortgage lender, I found myself curled up with my sister on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us while we binge-watched our favorite show. The laughter flowed between us, and for the first time in so long, I felt free, unconfined by our past but tethered to something new and beautiful. When morning came, as the birds chirped their daily greetings, I caught an early glimpse of my parents, standing tall against the dawn, ready to face the day. They seemed more resolute, the worry less visible as they exchanged quiet words. I knew we had moved past the point of being the assholes. We hadn't just weathered the storm, we had learned to dance in the rain, to let the drops wash away our fears, and we emerged, messy, imperfect, but undeniably united. Looking back, I realized that my initial reluctance to pay the mortgage had stemmed from a place of self-preservation and misunderstanding, but it quietly evolved into an opportunity for growth. In acknowledging my boundaries, I learned the importance of balance and the strength of family, and that love isn't just about sacrifice, it's about sharing, supporting, and ultimately embracing the complex layers that knit us together. So, was I the asshole? Not anymore. Just a person learning to navigate the beautiful chaos of family ties, tangled yet stronger for the journey we shared. As for an update, life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. A couple of months later, my parents expressed their gratitude. Our collective efforts had eased their burden, and they even started discussing investments in their favorite hobbies again. My sister and I grew closer, sharing our lives, guiding one another, and at times, still butting heads. Yet, each argument only served as an avenue for growth, a chapter added to our story. I think, in the quiet moments of reflection, that's the beauty of family. It's messy, sometimes frustrating, but amidst all that chaos, we often find our way back to each other. And really, isn't that what matters most? As I settled into this new rhythm of life, I noticed how the air felt different in our home. It was lighter, infused with the sense of camaraderie that had blossomed between my sister and me. On weekends, our kitchen filled with the sense of baking bread and simmering sauces, an orchestra of sound as we attempted new recipes together. But it wasn't all flour and laughter, the undercurrents of tension could still surface. I remember one particularly rainy Saturday afternoon when the sky mirrored our mood. I had returned home after a long week of work, exhausted and craving solitude. Instead, I found my sister hosting an impromptu gathering of her friends. The din of youthful laughter and music pulsed through the house, and I felt my heart thrum uneasily in my chest. I was torn between the discomfort of intrusion and the warmth of familial support in their laughter, which echoed off the walls like constant reminders of choices I didn't quite understand. Concealed within the whirlwind of my thoughts was the nagging feeling that the strides we had made had somehow become entangled with my sister's demands. As the chaos of her life spilled into our shared space, I found myself feeling suffocated by the very familial bond I had craved. When I finally mustered the courage to address it, my sister, caught off guard, was defensive. "You used to be so welcoming," she challenged, and I could sense the shadows of our past struggles creeping in. Inherently, this was a moment of vulnerability for both of us, and as the silence hung heavy before me, I realized it wasn't just about me needing space, it was also about her needing to assert her independence in this shared space. After what felt like an eternity of misunderstanding, we sat down, nursing cups of tea, the clamor of her friends fading into the background. I spoke my truth, gentle yet firm. "I love having you here, but I need a little room to breathe sometimes." I watched as her expression softened, the realization dawning on her like the morning sun breaking through the clouds. "I get it," she finally said, her voice laced with empathy. "I'm still figuring this out too." From there, we laid the groundwork for a new kind of understanding, one that delicately balanced my need for tranquility with her vibrant, chaotic energy. We established times for her gatherings, leaving pockets of silence for both introspection and connection. As months slipped by like the autumn leaves falling gently from the trees outside, our family dynamic eased into a rhythm that felt right. With the festive season approaching, my parents decided to host a holiday dinner, hoping to gather everyone, both a celebration of the many transformations we had weathered and a nod to the community we had formed. We'd always traded off holidays with each other, but this year felt different. It pulsed with undercurrents of genuine appreciation. As the table filled with food and laughter, I observed the way my sister's friends mingled effortlessly with our family, an intertwined tapestry of relationships. Each conversation brought forth stories, inherited laughter, the kind born from shared histories and new experiences alike. But amidst the joy, I saw the familiar glint of tension creeping into the room as my parents expressed worry over their lingering mortgage, a detail I had hoped to keep under wraps. My sister, well-intentioned yet impulsive, enthusiastically shared ideas for a crowdfunding initiative to help with expenses. The way my parents' glimmers with confused hesitation only added weight to the conversation. I felt the room pulse with apprehension as layers of unspoken concern layered themselves upon my heart. Stepping in, I breathed deeply, drawing from the wisdom that had built itself over months of navigating rough waters together. "Let's talk this through as a family," I suggested, knowing we could find common ground. We always had. The discussion that followed was cathartic and revealing, each family member presenting their views, fears woven seamlessly into a tapestry of resolution. Finally, we reached an understanding that eased all our hearts, an agreement to pool resources into a family fund that would alleviate some stress while allowing my parents to invest in their passions. It opened the door to a more significant discussion about finances, futures, and the shared desire to support one another. Sitting around that holiday table, the glows of fairy lights expertly littering the room flickered, mirroring the warmth in our hearts. I understood, in that moment, reassurance and growth can coexist, just as laughter and arguments can. Our journey had only begun to blossom, intricate and beautiful, revealing itself as we paid attention and cared for one another, an ever-evolving chapter filled with love. It was a moment of profound truth for me. Maybe, in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and honest, in navigating the messy underbelly of family life, we had built something sturdier than any foundation of separate lives. We had stitched a quilt of resilience, forever learning, forever growing, bound not by blood, but by our commitment to each other. I always thought I had a handle on my life, at least until that day in late October when I met Simon. My friends had introduced me to this charming, somewhat eccentric guy during a party at a local bar, and at first, I found his quirks pretty endearing. He had this way of dominating every conversation, offering insights that oscillated between profound and downright weird. It was a smaller gathering, just a handful of us nursing drinks and sharing stories, and when Simon spoke, everyone leaned in. Despite his tendency to ramble about conspiracy theories and existential thoughts, there was something magnetic about him that held my attention. Still, as the night wore on, I sensed a sort of edge to him, a flicker of something unsettling. Not long after that first meeting, we found ourselves reunited at a mutual friend's Halloween party. This time it felt different. I was enveloped by a growing unease as I watched him navigate around the room. His laughter came easily, but I noticed he seemed to concentrate a little too hard on the people he interacted with, as if he were dissecting them instead of simply chatting. He led conversations in odd directions, asking pointed questions that made others uncomfortable, often making observations that seemed oddly personal, despite their casual nature. "You know, you really shouldn't be drinking so much on an empty stomach," he quipped to Jenna, who had been sipping her fifth cocktail. It wasn't just concern, it felt like scrutiny. Over the weeks, my initial curiosity morphed into apprehension. I joked with friends that I was convinced Simon was a spy gathering intel on our little group, but deep down, I had a nagging fear that there was more to him than met the eye. One evening, I found myself sharing a quiet drink with Simon. I thought we were just having an innocent chat, but he began probing deeper, asking about my childhood. It didn't feel innocent at all. He asked about my fears and insecurities as if he were keeping score. Sitting there, I felt vulnerable, like he had unearthed parts of my soul I wasn't ready to share. Days went by, and I noticed little oddities that further twisted the discomfort into an unsettling kind of tension. I discovered he seemed to know far too much about me, and it terrified me how he could recall seemingly trivial details from conversations. It was like I had been unknowingly hypnotized by his charisma or even manipulated. I found myself questioning every interaction, waking up in the middle of the night worrying if I was being watched, and the paranoia finally culminated when I realized someone was outside my apartment late one night. I caught a glimpse of a figure in my peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow that vanished as I turned to confront it. My heart raced, and dread washed over me because that feeling was all too familiar, like a scene from a horror story. My fears bubbled over, and I reached out to my closest friend, Mia. Sitting on her couch, clutching a mug of tea, I exposed my thoughts, spilling out the strange occurrences and Simon's unnerving behavior. She listened patiently before suggesting I confront Simon about how I felt, an idea that sent shivers through me. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that I couldn't let this anxiety fester. So, I gathered my courage and arranged to meet Simon at a cafe across town, a small place he loved downtown with its mismatched furniture and the smell of freshly baked pastries. It created a stark contrast to the growing storm inside me. When I walked into the cafe, I felt every ounce of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Upon seeing Simon, sitting casually, a faint smile played on his lips. I couldn't help but subconsciously mirror it, yet my fingers were ice cold. I dove straight in, voicing my concerns, trying to keep my tone calm as I explained how his intense interest in my life was making me uncomfortable. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from amusement to a cold, calculated seriousness. He leaned closer, almost whispering, "You think I'm watching you? But I've merely been observing the fascinating patterns in your behavior." That cryptic comment sent a chill down my spine, and I took an involuntary step back. My mind raced as I stumbled to find words, but he continued. "People are so predictable, you see. We're all part of a grander experiment, a social behavior study that I've taken an interest in. Each of you is a case study that could unveil deeper truths about our existence." His confidence was disorienting, and I became acutely aware of the other patrons around us, observing me as if I were a persona in one of his twisted tales. I wanted to laugh it off, to walk away, but the fear was palpable. I excused myself, stepping outside into the brisk autumn air, letting the humidity of our conversation escape with every breath. Somehow, I managed to reach my car in a daze and drove straight to Mia's. I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing through the possibilities of what Simon might do next or if he had already manipulated others in similar ways. Just as I felt the weariness seep into my bones, the phone buzzed, an unknown number, but I picked up anyway. "I told you," Simon said, his voice seeping through the receiver with an unyielding calm that made bile rise in my throat. "You're part of the experiment now. Don't worry, you're doing beautifully." I hung up, feeling the life drain from my body. I realized I had to get as far away from Simon as possible, cutting ties with anyone connected to him. I spent a weekend isolating myself, gathering strength, and when Monday rolled around, I put my plan into action. I contacted some of our mutual friends, explained my concerns, and they were surprisingly receptive. It turns out, many felt the same instinctual discomfort around Simon, but no one had voiced it aloud, fearing judgment or ridicule. As we shared experiences, it became clear that Simon wasn't just another quirky guy, he had been a creeping dread in our midst. Eventually, we decided to cut him out of our lives collectively, more empowered and relieved than terrified. Months later, as winter neared, I sat at home one evening, buried in a book, when another unexpected but familiar buzz jolted me. It was Mia, a shared article on a local Reddit thread called "What's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human?" The title alone made all our previous discussions flood back. In the comments, people recounted their unsettling run-ins with individuals who excelled in manipulation and mind games, a rush of disquiet that reminded me of Simon. As I read through the frightening tales, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him since we distanced ourselves. I found solace in the boundaries I had created and the collective strength of those around me. For the first time in months, I managed to smile, grateful that while some minds can turn dark, together we could harness our vigilance and illuminate the edges of our lives. Life was still unpredictable and frightening at times, but I knew with the right people around me, I could face the shadows lurking in the corners. The house felt lighter that evening as I reflected on my past with Simon, the flickering glow of the candles casting playful shadows on the walls. Each shadow seemed to dance, reminding me that while darkness has its place, so does light. It was quiet in my little home, the only sounds coming from the soft rustle of the wind against the windows. I allowed my thoughts to drift back to the moments I had spent with Simon, the way his laughter used to fill the air, a brilliant counterpoint to the grim tales he told that left a chill in the spine. There was a time when I thought his peculiar interests in the macabre were merely eccentricities, charming quirks in an otherwise ordinary friendship, until they slowly unraveled into something much darker. I remembered the night I had confronted him about my concerns. It was the weekend we attended that horror festival together, a backdrop of laughter mingled with eerie attractions, a perfect blend of delight and dread. Simon had seemed particularly fixated on one exhibit, a grim display showcasing relics of unsolved mysteries and the minds that perpetrated them. Enthralled and oblivious to my discomfort, he stood there, his wide eyes gleaming with a curiosity that pressed against the boundaries of sanity. I could still hear the precise way he had articulated his thoughts that night, how he spoke of the genius behind the chaos, marveling at the way intelligence could twist into something so unpredictable and horrifying. As much as I loved Simon, I felt compelled to separate myself from that energy, from the way he seemed to absorb the darkness, as if it was a fuel he wanted to consume. "We're meant to explore life, not become ensnared in its darkest depths," I had said, and watching the sunlight fade that evening as we parted felt heavy, like ripping apart a thick tapestry we had woven together over years of camaraderie. I wasn't sure if I had saved him from himself or simply turned my back on the friend I remembered. In the months since, life carried on in shades of gray. I reconnected with old friends, leaning into laughter and warmth, rekindling a sense of community I thought I might have lost. Yet, the haunting questions lingered about Simon. Was he okay? Had I been right to walk away? And who was he without me? Each day I navigated these thoughts, trying to reconcile my memories with the resolve I built, telling myself time heals, even from the unseen fractures deep within friendship. One evening, as I thumbed through my usual online haunts, I stumbled upon a recent post that captured my attention. Ask Reddit, what's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human? Without expecting it, Simon's name flashed in my mind like a beacon through the haze of nostalgia. Curiosity spiraled within me, urging me to dig deeper. I clicked on the thread, half hoping to see a glimpse of him, perhaps a casual mention from some connection we had once shared, but it wasn't that simple. The stories people shared ranged from unsettling encounters with exceptional minds to bone-chilling displays of prodigious talent that had warped into something fearsome and complex. But as I scanned through the comments, talents that had emerged from shadows, one stood out to me, the tale of a brilliant mathematician who had calculated, quite accurately, how many people would evade justice. A subtle gnaw of recognition stirred within me. The writer described a friend who once had a penchant for solving puzzles, but his fixation twisted when he began to dabble in darker conspiracy theories, eventually leading him down a path that caused irrevocable harm. My stomach sank as I read on, the details bleeding into memories. I can't shake the feeling that this could easily have been Simon's path, one I had only narrowly avoided. The shadows of our past lurked in the corners of my mind, urging me to stand closer to the light, that fragile flicker of hope I had clung to. My heart raced, caught between hope and dread, and as I read that post, I felt propelled to reach out to him again, to see what he was doing, where his mind wandered now. I imagined sending him a simple message beginning with "Hey, it's been a while." But insecurity wrapped around me. What if he had gone too far into those darknesses? I hesitated as twilight bathed my room in hushed shades, comforted by my newfound clarity but fearful of upturning the peace I had built for myself. I closed my eyes and envisioned the warmth of my reconnecting relationships and the laughter shared around the dinner table, anchoring me against the uncertainty swirling inside. But as moments passed, an undeniable whisper beckoned me. Perhaps it was time to bring the light to him, to reach out and remind both of us we weren't alone in this. I went to bed that night with my heart divided, filling one side with hope and leaving the other, a fragment of fear that maybe, just maybe, I'd let darkness tether itself to me again. After all, we had both grown, and I could only hope the connection I built with my new friends might bridge a gap I once feared would swallow us both. The next morning, I finally resolved to send that message, and as I did, a feeling washed over me, a blend of fear and anticipation, illuminated by the lingering hope that both of us could face our shadows together and emerge unscathed, once more into the light. As I hit send, my heart raced, and I held my breath, waiting for yesterday's to echo with the voice of tomorrow. Could it be that simple? I spent years of my life terrified by Simon's erratic behavior, the way his laughter could turn to rage in an instant, spinning our once gentle friendship into a chaotic whirlpool of fear. Yet now, as the sun streamed through my window and enveloped the room in a warm glow, I wondered if there might still be remnants of the boy I once knew buried beneath layers of fear and mistrust. Moments turned into hours as I went about my day, engaging in the comforting routine that had replaced the chaos of my past. I cooked breakfast, buried myself in work, and spent time with friends who made that weight feel lighter. But in the back of my mind, Simon loomed like a distant storm cloud, reminding me that uncertainty still lingered between us. Just as evening approached and I settled into the comforting embrace of my couch, my phone buzzed, Simon's name lighting up the screen. My breath caught in my throat. As I read his message, I could feel the tight grip of anxiety begin to unravel. "Hey, it's good to hear from you. Been a while, huh? We should catch up." Simple words, yet they felt monumental, as though he was extending a hand across a chasm that had once felt insurmountable. We exchanged a few more messages, each filled with a mix of nostalgia and trepidation as we danced around unspoken issues, hinting at our respective journeys over the years. Simon shared stories of his struggles, gently peeling back layers of the fear I had once associated with him. He had sought help and was working towards healing, but it was his admission of vulnerability that shocked me. He spoke of loneliness and the desire for connection that he had hidden behind his bravado for so long. The shadows we both occupied began to intersect, forming a fragile bridge of understanding between us. The next day, we agreed to meet at our old coffee shop, the very place where our friendship had flourished before the darkness invaded our lives. My stomach twisted into knots as I prepared for our reunion, reminding me of those uncertain days back in high school, filled with unspoken promises and dreadful doubts. When I walked into the shop, a sense of familiarity rushed over me. The air was thick with the scent of brewed coffee and pastries, and I spotted Simon. Sitting at our usual table, his fingers tapping anxiously on the wooden surface. It was almost surreal to see him again, the contours of his face softer now, but his eyes carried that same spark of intensity I remembered. As I approached, I could feel my heart thumping loudly in my chest, a quick reminder of the trepidation still residing within. Our conversation started cautiously, filled with awkward laughter and small talk, each of us carefully navigating the landscape of our shared history. But as we delved deeper, the air shifted. Simon shared his journey, the therapy, the revelations, the regrets, and I shared my own, How the darkness of our past had forced me to redefine my relationships and prioritize my well-being. With each exchanged word, the timing seemed to feel less about reliving the past and more about grasping a future together. There was honesty in our confessions, a mutual understanding that built a resilience we both had lacked for so long. Just as we were beginning to find our footing, however, Simon's expression darkened. A brief silence settled between us, and I could see the pulse of memory crossing his face, a flicker of that old weight surfacing. "I still struggle with some days, you know?" he confessed, his gaze turning away. "There are shadows that feel familiar, and I sometimes forget how to step into the light." The vulnerability in his tone mirrored my own lingering fears, but instead of retreating, something instinctive stirred within me. "We can help each other," I suggested softly, not fully realizing how significant those words would be. "That's what friendship is, right? Clinging to the light even when everything else seems dark?" In that moment, the connection we built felt tangible, almost electric. We mapped out a strategy to support one another, regular meetups, sharing the burdens when either of us appeared to drift back toward the shadows. The coffee shop transformed into a haven of hope as we shared plans and dreams, and for the first time, I felt the familiar tug of an authentic friendship rekindling itself. Days turned into weeks, our meetings grew to be the highlight of our weeks, and little by little, I forgot the fear that once threatened to hold me hostage. We illuminated one another's paths, slowly building a friendship forged in honesty and vulnerability, teaching both of us that our pasts did not define our futures. And while the shadows still loomed faintly at the edges of my consciousness, I knew that they could no longer control me. I glanced at my phone one night while reminiscing and saw countless messages exchanged with Simon. It felt almost strange to think how far we had come from the chaos of last year. I smiled, reflecting on our journey, feeling that tether of fear dissipate, replaced with a shared commitment to shine brightly, together. Sometimes we'd stumble, but we were no longer alone. And that, I realized, was how we would continue to emerge unscathed. As the moonlight streamed through my window, illuminating the edges of my room, a thought settled within me. Perhaps true intelligence isn't merely about what we know, but about the connections we forge and the willingness to embrace vulnerability.